everyone, welcome to this explainer. If you really want to understand how the modern culinary world came to be, you are absolutely in the right place. We're just going to dive right in. Today, we are unpacking the completely fascinating 700-year evolution of French cuisine. But here's the thing, we aren't just looking at recipes today, we're looking at problem solvers. We're going to trace this history through 12 legendary chefs who each tackled the massive culinary problems of their specific eras, and in doing so, fundamentally changed how all of us eat today. To make sense of this massive, sprawling history, we're breaking it down into 5 key eras: the dawn of French cuisine, kings, courts, and madness, the era of haute cuisine, the Nouvelle Cuisine revolution, and finally, our modern masters.
So, here is our roadmap. We are starting way back in the 1300s and marching all the way up to the present day. Keep this 700-year progression in the back of your mind as we jump straight into the heavy, aggressively spiced world of medieval kitchens.
All right, that brings us to Section 1, the dawn of French cuisine. Or, honestly, as I like to call it, escaping the Italian spice trap. Let's look at the early struggle to unmask the true flavors of ingredients. Just look at the stark contrast between these two monumental books. First, we have Le Viandier by Guillaume Tirel, written way back in the 14th century. Back then, food was heavily roasted and literally buried in spices. It was a style really heavily influenced by Italian traditions, and it basically just masked the actual flavor of the meat. Fast forward a bit, and you see François-Pierre Lavaren's 1651 cookbook, Le Cuisinier François. This thing was revolutionary. Lavaren finally solved the problem of those masked flavors by breaking free from the exaggerated Italian seasonings and finally allowing the true taste of the food to shine through. So, the absolutely crucial point here is how Lavaren actually pulled this off. He completely overhauled the kitchen. He swapped out heavy lard for butter, a total game changer. He stopped using old bread to thicken soups and invented the roux. He introduced the bouquet garni for this really subtle herbaceous flavor instead of aggressive spice. And he even elevated eggs. He created 60 specific egg dishes, which, before him, had absolutely no place in high-class kitchens. Oh, and he also invented bechamel sauce and the millefeuille pastry. It's wild to think about, but we are still using his exact problem-solving techniques today. Moving right along to Section 2, Kings, Courts, and Madness. We are stepping into the intense 17th century now, where cooking for the French royal courts became an obsessively high-stakes and honestly fatal game. 36. That is the tragically young age at which the legendary, highly eccentric perfectionist Fritz Karl Vatel committed suicide. Why? Because a fish delivery for a massive royal banquet was delayed. He simply could not bear the perceived failure. And the saddest part? The fish actually arrived shortly after he took his own life. It's incredibly dark, but it perfectly illustrates the extreme, mind-bending pressure these chefs were under to deliver absolute perfection to the royal court. But despite all that madness, this royal era yielded some immortal classics that totally shaped our modern dessert menus. What you're seeing is the very first recorded recipe for crème brûlée, documented by François Massielot, a chef who cooked for royalty. Now, like most cookbooks of the era, his recipes were pretty loosely written without exact measurements, but that foundational brilliance of burning sugar over a rich custard, that was born right here in the midst of all that royal chaos. Which leads us to Section 3. The era of haute cuisine. We are now officially in the 19th century, an era that transformed cooking into a rigorous, glamorous high art form. But let me tell you, it came at a terrible physical cost. Just marvel at these sketches for a second. These are the designs of Marie-Antoine Carême. He was actually abandoned as a child during the French Revolution, but he rose through the ranks to become the chef of kings and the king of chefs. Carême elevated food to a literal architectural level, creating these incredibly elaborate sugar pyramids and temples inspired by classical architecture. And fun fact, he's also the guy who invented the tall white chef's hat, the toque, that is universally recognized today. But okay, let me shatter that glamorous illusion for just a second. Read this striking quote from Carême himself. The kitchens of the 19th century were windowless, underground, desert-hot dungeons fueled entirely by coal. Carême, like a lot of chefs from his time, ultimately died quite young, suffering from toxic coal fume inhalation. So the art was spectacular, for sure, but the working conditions, literally lethal. Obviously, someone had to fix this chaotic misery, and that someone was Georges-Auguste Escoffier. Escoffier drew from his own military experience during the Franco-Prussian War, where, by the way, he also pioneered the canning of meats, and he applied that strict military discipline directly to the kitchen. He created the brigade system. That's a rigid hierarchy assigning specific stations to specific chefs, which totally streamlined production and really reduced the sheer madness of Carême's era. Escoffier also abolished those heavy, exotic decorations, officially modernizing and codifying what we now know today as haute cuisine.
By the mid-1900s, though, it was time for another massive change. Section 4, the Nouvelle Cuisine Revolution. Chefs started rebelling against the heavy, opulent rules of classic cuisine in favor of something radically different: absolute simplicity.
Notice the stark shift in philosophy here. On one hand, you have classic cuisine, heavy, highly caloric, super opulent. But then we pivot completely to nouvelle cuisine, light, emphasizing natural flavors, leaning into regional roots, and presenting food in small, jewel-like portions. The guy who bridged these two worlds was a chef named Fernand Point. Point demanded fresh ingredients prepared on the exact same day, no leftovers, no heavy masking. He laid the crucial groundwork for his most famous student, Paul Bocuse.
Around this exact same time, we see the rise of Cuisine du Soleil, which literally translates to cuisine of the sun. This was a pivotal movement championed by chef Roger Verger. Verger actually earned 3 Michelin stars by turning the culinary world's attention completely away from Parisian butter and cream and pointing it directly toward the bright, fresh, sun-drenched olive oils and vegetables of the Mediterranean.
But the true pioneer, the guy who turned nouvelle cuisine into a global empire, that was Paul Bocuse. Bocuse wasn't just a chef. The man was a visionary businessman. He created the legendary soup VGE, which is a black truffle soup sealed in puff pastry, specifically for the French president. He designed the meals for the very first Concorde supersonic flights, and he founded the Bocuse d'Or, which is basically the Culinary Olympics. He brought the chef out of the kitchen and thrust them into international stardom.
And that brings us to our final era, Section 5, Modern Masters and Innovation. Here we're going to explore the late 20th century and modern visionaries who turned restaurants into massive, artistic, global empires.
Think about it for a second. After centuries of evolution, what actually defines a great chef today? I mean, we've gone from the subterranean laborer choking on coal smoke to an international celebrity, artist, and CEO. Today's chefs operate at a level of creativity and scale that the founders just couldn't possibly imagine.
Take Gaston Lenôtre, for instance. Paul Bocuse famously called him the Dior of pies. Lenôtre applied the really rigorous standards of haute couture fashion to pastry. He maintained absolute perfection on a massive, ready-to-wear scale. He wrote 9 global cookbooks, he cooked for the World Cup and the Olympics, and yes, he was even the primary inspiration for the famous chef character Gusteau in the Pixar movie Ratatouille.
You can really see how this evolved into modern creativity. Look at how a chef like Michel Bras uses fresh herbs and edible flowers to create plates that look exactly like abstract paintings. He is highly, highly experimental. But then, he is also responsible for a massive global phenomenon. Back in 1981, Bras patented a dessert that has since taken over the entire world, the chocolate collant, better known to most of us as the molten lava cake. Yes, that absolute staple of modern dining was born from an avant-garde French master.
17. That is a completely astonishing number. It represents the total number of Michelin stars held across the restaurants of our final chef today, Alain Ducasse. Alain Ducasse's personal story is nothing short of incredible. In 1984, he was the sole survivor of a horrific Learjet plane crash. He spent years in recovery, only to return and build an unmatched culinary empire. He was the very first chef in history to simultaneously own 2 3-Michelin star restaurants. Ducasse basically represents the modern peak. He breaks away from artificial plating to make absolutely sure that ingredients taste exactly, purely as they are, all managed with flawless precision across dozens of global locations. So the very next time you sit down at a restaurant, take a good look at your plate. From escaping the heavy spice traps of the medieval era, to surviving the literal fatal pressures of royal courts, and finally refining the art into pure natural flavors. Every single technique you taste is the result of 700 years of intense, passionate problem solving. Which leaves us with one delicious question. What will be the next revolution on your plate? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer of our source materials, and I'll catch you next time.